of children are dying of starvation. It's unbearable. How could anyone?
The famine gets even worse in Gaza, and dozens are allegedly killed by Israel trying to get food. Hello, I'm Edmund, and this is The Heat. Palestinians seeking aid in Gaza have been attacked and killed for a third day in a row, according to medics and officials in the south of the territory. The Palestinian Health Ministry says at least 27 people were shot dead and many others wounded by Israeli fire at a food distribution point in Rafah. Israel says its troops fired near individual suspects who failed to heed warnings to retreat and that it is investigating. The aid centers are being run by a private group backed by the United States and Israel, an operation that's repeatedly been criticized by the United Nations.
We went to the Nazarene corridor to receive humanitarian aid, but it turned out to be a huge risk. My husband was wounded. This is the reality in Gaza. Instead of returning with food and aid, we come back wounded, carried away.
I don't want to go to the American centers. This is not aid. It's a trap set for the Palestinian people by the occupation army. The Americans are no better than the Israelis. They might even be worse.
To talk about the situation in Gaza, we are joined now by Jonathan Fowler. He's a spokesperson for the UN's Relief and Works Agency. Jonathan, thanks for joining us. Let's start with the latest in Gaza right now. The United Nations says Gaza is, quote, the hungriest place on earth, and that the entire population in that enclave is at risk of famine. What can you tell us about conditions there right now?
The situation within the Gaza Strip is I mean, it's almost beyond words now. It's very hard to describe it. I mean, we're seeing an enormous humanitarian tragedy, and yes, indeed. I mean, the hungriest place on earth. This is entirely man-made. This does not have to be. During the ceasefire, we were able to scale up aid massively through the United Nations system, a system which is tried and tested, used around the world, proof of concept, able to bring in aid massively to alleviate some of the suffering. And then the guillotine fell on aid at the beginning of March. So this hunger, these famine-like conditions are the result of policy decisions and nothing else.
Jonathan, what you say about what took place during the ceasefire when food was distributed, Israel says now it is blocking aid because Hamas is getting hold of that aid. How come it was working during the ceasefire at that point and not working now?
The issue there, I mean, this is a common narrative that we've heard from Israeli officials and some others over and over, which is this allegation of some sort of massive diversion of our aid by Hamas and other armed groups in the Gaza Strip. It's simply untrue. There is no evidence at all for anything systemic. There have been occasions of looting, for example, but those have tended to be a product of either the activities of certain criminal gangs in a situation of complete breakdown of law and order and of anarchy, or of absolute desperation from a starved population. The current system in place does not do anything to meet the survival needs of the population. The system is not based on the basic principles of humanitarian law, whereas the way the United Nations and international NGOs operate, it is based on that. And as we demonstrated during the ceasefire, we were able to bring some kind of relief to an absolutely desperate population.
Recently, the Israeli Foreign Minister, Gideon Saar, he made this statement. Let's listen to it.
There is no famine in Gaza Strip. It is simply not true.
So there we heard it from the Israeli Foreign Minister. There is no famine. It is simply not true. So how do you reconcile what you were telling us with what the Israeli Foreign Minister is telling us?
The facts on the ground speak for themselves. The IPC, which is an international body of a range of United Nations agencies and major international NGOs, which does analysis around the world of food crises, has repeatedly flagged that the Gaza Strip has been tipping into famine-like conditions. Famine is a very technical label, and frequently when famine is formally declared, it's often too late. We've seen this in the past where, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people in other places have died, and then famine is formally declared because data needs time to catch up. But the data on the ground speak for themselves, and the data are that the overwhelming majority of the population is hungry. A block of the population is tipping into, acute food insecurity, severe malnutrition. Look, I mean, our medical staff on the ground, we have 12,000 operational staff in the Gaza Strip. We continue to provide basic medical care, primary health care. Our medical staff do something as basic as measuring the arm circumference of young children to see if their arms are too small for their age. We're seeing over and over examples of this. Children are stunted. Children's development is being impaired. This is going to have lifelong impacts if they survive this war. So it's not possible to reconcile the facts on the ground with the claim there is no famine. It's simply untrue.
There is an organization called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which claims to be distributing food to Palestinians in Gaza. What do you know about this organization? As we said in our introduction, it's backed by Israel and the United States. And why is the UN opposed to what it's doing?
Well, the operations of this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation are quite nebulous. Just because you put humanitarian in the name of something, that does not make it necessarily, by definition, compatible with international humanitarian law. Now, international humanitarian law sounds like jargon, but it's the term for the ensemble of the laws of war. Wars have rules, wars have laws. Humanitarian aid operations in war zones also have laws. The former CEO of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation actually quit before it became operational, saying that he was not in a position to guarantee respect for international humanitarian law. Now, he cited concerns about impartiality, neutrality, independence, and basic humanity. We have been saying this, UNRWA and the rest of the United Nations system and big international NGOs have been saying, as soon as this concept was first floated, this is not the way to do things. There is a system that could operate if it were allowed to operate. This is a privatization of aid. It's a weaponization and militarization of aid. It is not doing enough. It's not doing anything, even vaguely, beginning to scratch the surface of meeting the needs of the population. This concept, as our Commissioner General, the head of UNRWA, has underscored, people are going into death traps in a desperate attempt to receive aid. And then the operational model, even requiring people to walk dozens of kilometers to a place to get aid. What about the people who cannot walk? What about the people who are not able to get to these aid distribution sites? What's supposed to happen to them? So this concept is fundamentally flawed. And tragically, the incidents that we've been seeing, and the reported incidents, they illustrate the fact that this concept is not working.
Right, those incidents that you talk about, there were 20 Palestinians killed and more than 100 were wounded near one of these food distribution points. That was 2 days ago. The New York Times initially reported those killings, but did not say who did the shootings. But there's been a second mass murder this morning, and this time both shootings are attributed to the Israelis. In the latest shootings, 27 Palestinians were killed while making their way to a food distribution center. As you say, many of them are walking many kilometers to get to these distribution centers. And that is fraught with danger because they are going through Israeli checkpoints on their way to these centers. What can you tell us about the level of distribution that's taken place already?
Well, the level of distribution, obviously, I can't speak for this GHF, but people have been talking, the numbers they've been talking about, say 20 trucks today or something like that. Well, the minimum number, and this is what we were able to do as the UN system during the ceasefire, was to get in 600 trucks a day. And that's the minimum that is needed to meet the survival, basically the basic survival needs of the population of the Gaza Strip, more than 2 million people. 20 trucks is not enough. Calling it a drop in the ocean would be a massive exaggeration and over-generous, I have to say. Not enough is being brought in. And again, this is a matter of choice. Before the ceasefire, we faced huge restrictions on being able to bring in aid. The best we were ever able to achieve as a result of these restrictions was maybe like 300 trucks on any one day. But usually, it was like a dozen, maybe 100, maybe less. It's never been enough. And then, of course, a complete ban, a complete siege was placed on aid from the beginning of March until it was slightly lifted a couple of weeks ago. So, really, I mean, this is not a solution. This is not being done in the right way. One has to question what the motives are for this. I mean, some people may say, well, even a small amount is better than nothing. But the point is that what about the people who are not receiving the aid? The UN goes to where people are, people that need it, doesn't use this kind of system. And that's why this system is objectionable in terms of humanity.
And if we look at the impact this is having, the Palestinian Health Ministry says 57 children have died from the effects of malnutrition. Separately, 29 deaths were directly caused by starvation. Up to 10,000 people have died due to famine and related health crises. Have you been able to establish the death toll just from the lack of food, from malnutrition and starvation?
It's very difficult to collect, the full picture of data here, but we know what we see in our clinics. And I want to emphasize, we have, I mean, before the war, UNRWA was operating 20 plus medical centers across the Gaza Strip doing primary healthcare, not surgery, not those kind of things, but essential primary healthcare. We have that network of clinics. Unfortunately, only half a dozen of them are now able to operate, but we also have mobile medical teams. We have temporary medical points. So we see people. We're seeing over 10,000 patients a day, basically. So we know what we see. As the data gets fed up the chain, we see increasing reports of malnutrition, the impacts thereof. And these are just the people we're seeing, of course. You never know the people who are in zones where they're not able to come to get medical care. So sadly, and this is not uncommon in war zones, the full picture of the crisis as faced by civilians may only emerge when the guns fall silent. But the problem is we are beginning, we see more and more now, and this feels like the tip of the iceberg, and this is extremely worrying because, as I said earlier, malnutrition, yes, people need to survive its impacts right here, right now, but it has long-term physical, mental development impacts, particularly on young children, and that is going to have societal impacts for decades to come.
Jonathan Fowler, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
To continue our discussion, let's bring in our panel. In our studio, Edmund Ghareeb is an academic and Middle East expert. Here in Washington, Dan Arbell is scholar in residence at the Center for Israeli Studies at American University. And Abdel Bariatwan is editor-in-chief at Rai al-Yum. He joins us from London. Welcome to all of you. Dan Arbell, as we just heard, Israel is being severely criticized for blocking food, humanitarian aid, medical supplies from getting into Gaza. The effort by the organization known as the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has now also been drastically reduced on the orders of the Israeli government. Let's listen to what the chief of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, Philippe Lazzarini, had to say about this.
We used to have before 400 distribution places, center in Gaza. With this new system, we are talking about 3 to 4 maximum distribution place. So it's also a way to incite people to be forcibly displaced to get humanitarian assistance.
So, Dan, the United Nations is also warning that the entire population of Gaza is now facing famine. What is the Israeli assessment of conditions in Gaza right now and of this group, Gaza Humanitarian Foundation?
I think that Israel has come to realize that it needs to step up its efforts to allow the flow of more humanitarian aid into Gaza. It's come under great criticism from the United States, Europe, and other countries in the region. And as Israel was opposing any humanitarian assistance, as there was no hostage release or ceasefire deal, now it is on board in terms of trying to allow more humanitarian aid to flow in. Obviously, on the ground, there are a lot of difficulties, and Israel is primarily concerned that Hamas would seize these shipments, these assistance packages, and will not allow its direction into the places it needs, that are most in need. Therefore, Israel insisted on having the GHF be in control and have those distribution centers. And obviously, there is a lot of pressure there building on those in the centers. And Israel's concerned about security aspects of it, and also about the fact that, again, that Hamas will somehow get into those areas and try and take the assistance packages from where they're actually needed. So I think that's what we're seeing right now. I think it will be a few more days, but we are seeing more and more trucks come in and more distribution taking place. Obviously, around those areas, there's a lot of commotion and tension, but hopefully in the coming days, these things will be more streamlined and we'll see a more effective way in distributing the shipments and actually allowing those in great need to receive the food, medicine, and supplies.
Dan, very briefly, why isn't Israel allowing the United Nations to use its aid distribution system in Gaza? As we just heard from the UN spokesperson, it is a system that has been tried and tested.
Well, we have to go back again to October 7th and the fact that UNRWA workers were part of an attempt, part of those Hamas units and operatives that entered Israel, killing innocent Israeli civilians. Therefore, there's no trust that Israel has towards the UN facilities and institutions and workers that are operating in Gaza. And therefore, Israel insisted on having a US-based company like GHF, in which Israel has a say in order to take action and take over control of the distribution of humanitarian aid. Israel has no trust in the UN system, unfortunately.
Arbell Bari-Atwan, as Dan tells us, Israel has no trust in the UN system. Now we have almost all Palestinians in Gaza have been displaced, forced to move from one location to another. Now, as the UN tells us, they are facing a famine. And there have been allegations, which you've heard, that Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war intended to force Palestinians off their land. How do you see what is going on there?
It is a genocide. It is ethnic cleansing. I believe the Israeli always using the name of Hamas as an excuse to carry out this genocide in Gaza. United Nations was surprising, was actually looking and supervising all these food or human aids to the Palestinians for the last 77 years. And I am one of them, one of the Palestinian refugees who used to actually depend on United Nations distribution of food. So why the Israeli, the only country on the earth, doesn't trust United Nations? What Hamas nothing to do with the food distribution in Gaza. So the Israeli using the foods, the human aids, as a weapon of starvation against the Palestinians. 60 children died yesterday because of malnutrition, because of starvation. This is what the Israeli want. And add one other example. For example, they are using this center of distribution food to the Palestinians as a trap to kill the Palestinians. More than 60 people were massacred just 3 days ago by the Israeli bombardment when they were actually queuing to get their food from the so-called foundation of American Foundation distributing this food. This is the problem. We have to admit these facts on the ground. People are starving, and they have two choices: either to die because of starvation or to die by the Israeli bomb.
Okay, Arbell Bari-Atwan, on that last point that you made, I want to get Dan Arbell's response to that. Dan, there have been about 20 Palestinians who were killed. That was 2 days ago. And then this morning we heard that 27 more Palestinians have been killed, both very close to these food distribution points. The New York Times attributed these shootings to Israel. What's happened there?
So what I understood is that the allegations of an Israeli bombardment which killed dozens yesterday turned out to be totally false. And what happened today is that what I understand is, according to what IDF has released in the recent last few hours, is that Israel was not aiming to kill or shoot dozens of people. It did, however, fire at individuals that were in the area, and they were disturbing the peace, and they were disturbing the streamlining of the humanitarian aid. Look, this is a tragic situation of humanitarian crisis, of very bad conditions on the ground. But Israel has no deliberate policy of having people starving or hungry or anything of that sort. It is trying to allow more humanitarian aid to flow in. And it's very hard. The conditions on the ground in Gaza make it very hard for Israel to operate. But I think that there is no deliberate policy of shooting at people queuing in lines in an orderly way, or those who are not disrupting the peace or are being, posing a threat to Israeli security forces that are in the area.
Edmund, great to have you in the studio. Let's listen to what the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said about the plight of Palestinians in Gaza. Let's watch.
People want to leave, but they can't. So it's the biggest open air jail in the world. As far as we're concerned, we'll let anybody leave. If you want to leave, leave.
So what do you make of that comment? I mean, the Prime Minister of Israel, they're telling us that if Palestinians want to leave, they can, but there is some other military force confining them to the territory.
This is a very good point, actually, because Netanyahu, when he was saying that the people can leave, in fact, when he called it the open air prison. This is what people in the past used. Those were the terms that were used, that this is a concentration camp. And Mr. Netanyahu and other Israeli leaders said this is nonsense. This is not true. There is no, the situation is normal. And although the Israelis control the air, they control the sea, and they control the land border, except for the part which borders Egypt. But clearly what the Israelis are trying to do, what the right wing in Israel want, is they want the expulsion, another Nakba. To expel the Palestinians from Gaza and to have greater Israel. Even yesterday, we have heard that from Israeli officials that the West Bank also it would be targeted. And there was talk that there would be expulsion from the West Bank. The people from the West Bank would be expelled to Jordan. The people in Egypt, in Gaza, to Sinai or Egypt, or to Lebanon. There were even talk. There was an Israeli strategist who wrote an article for an American military journal who spoke about expulsion of the people of Galilee to Lebanon. So that shows that there is a plan, an Israeli plan by the Israeli right wing, the most extreme factions who dominate the government now. Basically, they want to have a greater Israel. And the map that Mr. Netanyahu showed at the UN, that included areas that even reached Saudi Arabia, Syria, and other areas. So that raises a much more important question. And this is, what's the purpose of Israel? What are the Israelis trying to do?
Dan Arbell, there are now more and more countries, including allies of Israel, that are criticizing the country. I mean, we look at countries like Chile, Brazil, Slovenia, Norway, even France and the United Kingdom and Canada, saying that the war has gone on for far too long, has killed far too many people, and some countries are even considering sanctions against Israel. I mean, in the media as well, in the Western media, we hear the word genocide being used more and more often. I mean, that was taboo just a few months ago. Now it's being widely used. I mean, is Israel losing support, the support of its allies?
I think that you're pointing to a correct, a very accurate trend here that we're seeing, that Israel is becoming more and more isolated internationally. And certainly it has a lot to do with its policies in Gaza. And it's very unfortunate, but Israel has a very hard, first of all, its government is very far to the right. Second, it has a very hard problem in explaining itself. And its policies, and it is not setting clear goals to end the war, and how will this war end, and so on and so forth. So certainly Israel is in a bind here, and Israel but Israelis themselves, it's interesting to point out that a lot of Israelis are so much still traumatized by October 7th that they're so convinced that they're right and that the country is right and it's doing what it needs to do, is that they're kind of ignoring this building of international pressure on Israel.
Right.
And that's an unfortunate thing. And I think that Netanyahu is tapping into that constituency, those supporters or other, the public who feels that Israel is being attacked wrongfully. I personally think that the war should end. I think that Israel should stop the war. It certainly will alleviate the situation. Israel would become more acceptable in the international community and not like the challenges that it faces now. I think that we're a long way from that, unfortunately.
Right. Abdel Bari Antoine, do you believe this criticism from some of Israel's allies is genuine, or is it some kind of a public relations stunt to placate public opinion? The reason I ask that question is because if you take, say, for instance, a country like the United Kingdom, which has been now criticizing Israel. I mean, it criticizes Israel, but continues to supply weapons to Israel. In fact, the Foreign Secretary in the UK was asked about this. Why were these weapons being supplied to Israel? And he came up with something where he said, well, we will interrupt the global supply chain if we stop supplying these weapons.
This is actually false, completely false. It is hypocrisy. They know the public opinion on the West, in Britain and Canada and France, they are against this Israeli genocide, and they raise their voices clearly. If they are serious about this, they are going to implement what they are saying. They should treat at least the Israeli like Russia. When actually Russia, because of Ukrainian war, they imposed, embargo on Russia. They should, if they are serious, they should actually impose, arm embargo on the Israeli, economic sanction on the Israeli, actually ban the Israeli from participating in any sport tournaments. These kind of moves will prove to us or to their own people that they are serious and they are affected by the situation, the genocide in Gaza, but they are not doing that at all. This is the problem. They are hypocrites. They are really not saying the truth to their own people.
Edmund, I've just got a couple of minutes left. How would you characterize the current relationship between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu? We know that during that recent visit to the Middle East, Trump did not stop in Israel. He negotiated with Hamas, sidelining Israel as well. And of course, on a related issue, he's been talking to Iran as well.
Well, clearly there is a tense relationship. Nevertheless, the president continues to support Israel, to protect Israel, both diplomatically and providing and sending weapons to Israel. Nevertheless, I think the administration realizes more and more, and people within the administration, apparently there are different perspectives within that. Some are deciding that the continuing to support Israel has a price. That the administration has a price to pay. And as you were mentioning earlier, that's what we had seen. We have countries like Canada, Britain, even Germany, which was amazing, surprised a lot of people, and France, who are becoming very critical of Israeli behavior and what they are doing in Gaza. And that's why I think the administration is facing more pressure. Nevertheless, I don't think it has decided yet to put the kind of pressure on Israel that it needs to end it. And I think what you mentioned, the other point, is the question of Iran. Netanyahu wants to wage war against Iran. He cannot do it himself. He wants the U.S. to do it. And I think that President Trump does not want to see that, even though he says, of course, and so do the Iranians, they do not want to become a nuclear power.
And that is where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. And that is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington.